Bonjour à toutes et tous. Merci d'être venus si nombreux à ce meeting international contre la guerre. Dans cette salle pleine à craquer
for this
du Dôme de
international
Paris.
meeting in this
Merci
packed
aux 150
Dôme de Paris
délégués de la conférence
auditorium.
européenne
Thank you to the 150 delegates of the European conference that took place yesterday for being here with us today. Delegates coming from 18 European countries, United States and Palestine. Now, this meeting is taking place today because in May, with our friends from the English organization Stop the War, we met and we exchanged on the situation. We jointly decided that it was high time that we brought together all the democratic forces, democratic political trade unionists against the war and the governments responsible for the war. During this meeting, we're going to give the floor to militants from Palestine, Ukraine, Russia, United States, Great Britain, Italy and France. This is a meeting about fight, about rupture. When 400 militants from the Smooth Flotilla were arrested offshore in Gaza by the Israeli armed forces, sent to jail, accused of having tried to block Gaza. José Nivoy, who is the spokesperson for the autonomous dockers group in Italy, and he was supposed to take the floor today and deliver a speech. And I have the pleasure of announcing that he was freed yesterday. He was released from the jail yesterday. More than 130 members of the flotilla have been released thanks to the demonstrations, strikes that took place in a number of countries. I would like to thank the activists and those who are still being held by the Israeli armed forces, 4 representatives from the French government party France Insoumise, who are actually conducting a hunger strike. And we are demanding that they are released and that the Gaza blockade is stopped. I would like to also commend the fight by the trade unionists and trade unions, CGT, Force Ouvrière in France, FSU, Solidaire. All these trade unions have been fighting the war, have been fighting against the Gaza genocide, have been fighting the budget that are putting the populations under a lot of pressure. It's very normal that some of them, alone or with their trade unions, came here to this event to contribute to the success of our movement. I would also say hello to the members of parliament representing La France Insoumise, who are relentlessly fighting in the French parliament, but also in the street. And I would like to say hello to all the activists, all the organizations who contributed to this meeting's success. I would also like to say hello and welcome Christian Théin, who is the president of FNNKS, representing the Kanak party from New Caledonia. He was imprisoned 17,000 kilometers from home and still under a investigated by the French government, and it is continuing with the International Committee Against the Repression. I would also like to welcome Stephen Kapos, 88 years old, survivor of the Holocaust, who has participated in all the demonstrations in favor of Palestine. He came from London to participate in the meeting. All together we can put an end to this war. While the Gaza population is being slaughtered, threatened by Netanyahu and the government, when the plan imposed by Donald Trump is a turnaround in the situation, when across the world, in all the continents, demonstrations are taking place, bringing thousands and millions of people down in the street, people who are shocked by the Gaza Holocaust. It is an honor for us to welcome Maased Ali and Oli Noy, both coming from Palestine.
Free, free Palestine, free, free Palestine, free, free Palestine.
Mahasem Abel El-Hadi is from Palestine. She is a trade unionist and a member of the association, Jewish and Arab Association, standing together, fighting the war in Gaza within Israel. Orly Noy, who's an Israeli journalist and chief editor of the website in Hebrew Local Call and chairperson of the Executive Council of B'Tselem. They are both going to deliver a speech during this meeting. Please, a round of applause.
أيها الرفاق الأعزاء، أيها الإخوة والأخوات الأعزاء، مساء الخير. نستمع اليوم في هذا الاجتماع الدولي الهام.
Within this important international meeting, dear friends, at a time when the people and the workers and the Palestinian people are facing the greatest challenges due to acts of war and destruction perpetrated by the State of Israel, supported by the world imperialism, and especially American imperialism. I would like to start by talking about the peace, the so-called peace plan suggested by American President Trump following Gaza destruction in a situation, unprecedented situation, where demonstrations are increasing across the world. In a situation where the State of Israel is facing numerous challenges. As I speak, the situation is still very uncertain. The Gaza population continues to experience fear and being threatened by the Israeli war machine. Of course, our people in Gaza and in Palestine, as across the world, wants a ceasefire and wants this genocide to end, the genocide perpetrated by Israel. We have learned a long time ago not to trust American and Israeli chiefs of state. We still believe, like all the Palestinian population, that Trump and the American administration are only serving Israel's interests. They don't want to defend the legitimate national rights of the Palestinian people. Clearly, this plan is but one more attempt to place the Palestinian population under the American control. With this plan, we will move from a genocide perpetrated with bombs to a genocide brought about by isolation. Palestinians will be parked in Bantustans, refugee camps. Many think that Trump's plan is only a trap, trying to discourage the Palestinian population. Everyone in Palestine wants the genocide to come to an end. And we all hope that things will change for the better. But one thing is sure, a new era is about to start, a new phase is about to start. And the highest spheres of world imperialism are not going to stop us from demanding freedom and the return of the Palestinian population to Palestine. Dear friends, in our country, Israel has perpetrated the most horrendous crimes against our people, causing catastrophic destruction everywhere, destroying hospitals, universities, schools, and all the sanitary institutions, arts centers, education centers. This war is about exterminating the Palestinian population. The only goal is to get rid of the Palestinian cause and the fight for the Palestinian population in the West Bank, in the Gaza Strip, and across the world with the diaspora. Stopping the Nakba, bringing an end to the Nakba that started in 1948. This is what Israel is trying to achieve with this brutal war against Gaza. As a Palestinian trade unionist, it is important for me to highlight the situation of the Palestinian workers and the destruction brought about by the war to the workers of the Palestinian population. Until October the 7th in 2023, 125,000 Palestinian workers from the West Bank and from the Gaza Strip were working in Israel. They had permits to cross the border, and approximately 80,000 Palestinian workers worked in Israel without a permit to cross the border. On October the 8th, Israel removed all the permissions for Palestinian workers to go to Israel. According to the reports collected by our trade unions from the Gazan workers, hundreds of Gazan workers who could not go to the West Bank were arrested in military camps, tortured and abused by the Israeli occupation soldiers. Dozens were killed in the Israeli jails. I want to mention the fact that more and more colons are being attacked in the West Bank. Houses are being destroyed. The brutal war waged by the Israelis is not limited to the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. It also involves Palestinian Arabs who stayed in their homes, in their countries after the 1948 Nakba. They live in an apartheid system that takes their lands and destroys their houses. the brutality of the regime imposed upon them has increased since October the 7th, because they had an additional reason, or the racist regimes had an additional reason to punish all of the Palestinian population, wherever they are. Within the country, hundreds of political activists, workers, artists, doctors, nurses were arrested. Hundreds of workers and Arab employees were fired simply because they expressed their solidarity with their brothers and sisters in Gaza. Again, the false pretext was solidarity to Hamas and the terrorist organizations. But in spite of the oppression, we resisted Netanyahu and Ben Gvir, and we continue to demonstrate and protest. Yesterday, there was a huge demonstration in Sachin within the Green Line. It was the biggest demonstration. The biggest since October 2023. So, in this background, with this background, hunger and genocide and despair in Gaza are increasing. The international solidarity campaign is expanding across all the continents. There are huge demonstrations demanding the end of the genocide and condemning all the governments that are in favor of the genocide.
Long live Palestine. We want Palestine to live. Palestine must live. This solidarity makes us Palestinians stronger and even more determined to fight for our legitimate rights to come back to freedom and independence in Palestine.
Viva, viva Palestine.
Viva, viva Palestine.
تحيا تحيا فلسطين.
In this occasion, I'd like to honor the heroes of the fleet from the resistance that were arrested by the Israeli police. And those who were freed yesterday or released yesterday after a wave of popular anger everywhere in the world. I'd like to also thank all the Jews and voices in Israel who go down on the streets to call for the end of the war and the end of famine in Gaza. We are convinced that these demonstrations denouncing genocide with the complicity of the governments will continue. For decades, the global leaders have suggested peace plans one after the other, while repression, barbarity, and division between the peoples is increasing. This is expressed in the Solidarity global movement that is changing into a global movement against complicit leaders, and it will last as long as there will be oppression on the Palestinians. There will be no peace in the world. All of this strengthens our conviction that the solution for one democratic state in Palestine from the sea is the only solution for Palestinians and Jews in Israel. River to the sea. So to live freely with social justice and peace, without any persecution, racism, and without segregation. Palestine will be freed from the river to the sea is a global motto now, and it is for everyone, everyone who wants to live in freedom. I want to thank you and Kare for international solidarity with Palestine and for the return, freedom, and independence of Palestine. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
Thank you very much. I love you.
Thank you very much. I love you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a privilege to be speaking here today, and especially alongside my dear, dear friend, Mohsen. We are gathering in really strange days. After 2 years of systematic annihilation of civilian population, of starving helpless children to death, of a genocide taking place in live broadcast before the eyes of the world, we cling to the hope that perhaps at last this horror is coming to an end. Not because we have any faith in the purity of intent of the two criminals who hatched this agreement, both belong on the benches of The Hague, but because hope is one of the essential tools in the toolbox of our struggle. When I was preparing my remarks for this conference, I plan to describe the components of the genocide as analyzed in depth in B'Tselem's report, Our Genocide. But then I changed my mind. After all, the audience in this room knows full well the nature of the crimes that Israel has been committing in Gaza, and details can be read in the reports by B'Tselem and by other Palestinian and international organizations. Instead, I want to say a few words about soul-searching and about political imagination. Because sooner or later, the genocide in Gaza will end, and only then will we begin to digest the full dimensions of the catastrophe that Israel brought upon the Strip. We must begin to prepare for that day and for what it will demand of all of us. The day after will demand a thorough soul-searching from many, first and foremost from us, the Israeli Jewish public. We will need to examine in depth all the processes of dehumanization of Palestinians for decades, and be accountable for the racism, the racial laws, the land theft, the ethnical cleansing, the indiscriminate killing, the siege, the humiliation, the cultural erasure, and so much more. No new reality will ever be possible without this reckoning and without the criminals both brought to justice and punished. But the governments around the world will also have to be held accountable for how they allowed Israel to establish over decades a clear apartheid regime and still call it a democracy. For how they supported Israel's unimaginable violence over the years, armed it, and kept calling Israel a democracy. And how they continue even now to ignore the institutionalized everyday violence against Palestinians in the West Bank and the systematic racist discrimination against the Palestinian citizens of Israel. The blood of the genocide victims in Gaza is also on their hands. Yet, the day after will also demand of us a different kind of political imagination, freer, braver, to refuse the colonial dictates that seek to force us a twisted understanding of reality in service of their corrupted interest. We can ask, for example, why is it that the dominant political discourse in the West today takes for granted that the Israeli-American demand that Hamas will not be a part of any future agreement in Gaza, yet does not even think to demand the same regarding Netanyahu and his blood-soaked government? How is it possible that we don't hear a clear international demand to condition any future agreement on the removal from power of every member of this criminal government of genocide and bringing Netanyahu before the International Criminal Court? How is it even conceivable that regime that carried out a genocide would continue to be legitimate? Another example of the importance of political imagination can be given in the context of the recent recognition by several countries of the state of Palestine. After 2 years of annihilation, the idea that such a symbolic act with almost no real meaning would be considered a sufficient act is an insult and a shameful attempt to limit our political imagination. We cannot accept that. All of those states have far more effective tools to stop Israeli machine of destruction. We demand that those tools will be used. The bold an effective political imagination refuses to submit to the dividing lines that those with vested interests seek to draw for us. One of the things that most frightens the Israeli apartheid regime is crossing the lines that separate the two peoples who live on this land. Therefore, we must define more accurately the dividing lines, not Jews versus Palestinians, but supporters of freedom and equality versus oppressors, supremacists, racists, colonialists. It is a struggle between those who build walls and those who tear the walls down. Regrettably, and I say it very sincerely, the number of such people in Jewish Israeli society is still very small. You know, in Israel, nationalist, militarist brainwashing begins right in the delivery room. So that when those young people reach the age of 18 and are legally required to enlist in the army, only very few of them are free enough in their minds to be able to resist. But as a long-time political activist, I know for certain that change is possible and that we do not have the privilege to not fighting for it. In the end, and I will conclude with this, in the end, the genocide in Gaza will end. But in many ways, our work will only begin the day after, to dismantle the Israeli apartheid regime and establish in its place a space for equality, for dignity and liberty for all the inhabitants of this land. Our weapons in this struggle this ongoing struggle will be our moral high ground, our courage, our political imagination, our determination, and our solidarity. It will be a difficult task, but we do not have the privilege of failing for the sake of the generations to come, Palestinians and Jews alike. Thank you very much.
He's Italian and national coordinator of the Potere al Popolo organization, Power to the People. He will replace José Nivoy, the spokesperson for the autonomous union of dockers in Genoa. He was just freed after having arrested by the Israeli army for having onboarded a ship. The process is ongoing. That saw millions of Italians on the streets and take part in the general strike that took place on Friday in support to these ships in Gaza. Maurizio Coppola, the floor is yours. Dear friends, it's incredible to take the floor after the Palestinian speeches. I'm replacing José Nivoy, who I want to say hello to with all my heart and all the organization, all the members. Hopefully he was able to come back to Italy last night, as was said, but I'd like to honor him once again because I think it's essential. Greta, Rimassan, everyone who is in the Israeli jails, tortured in unacceptable conditions. There are years where nothing happens and weeks or where decades take place. I think that everybody knows this sentence, and this is what we are experiencing in Italy. You saw during the month of August the two great general strikes on 22nd of September in October, and the great demonstration that took place yesterday afternoon in Rome, with 1 million people were on the streets in the capital to say no to the genocide, to the no to the complicity of Italy to this genocide. In September, we had 1 million people blocking the bay. On October 3rd, 2 million people. So this movement is growing, increasing, and this is extremely important. We must focus on this. Many have asked us a question: why in Italy? Why all of a sudden? Why have these decades been taking place in weeks? It's difficult to answer. In the midst of the movement, we are in the midst of it. We are organizing the next blockade, but it's worth it. It's really worth stopping at some point to better understand what is happening, because it's also helpful to us to strengthen our movement. One essential thing is that without Palestine, this wouldn't have been possible. So we need to take this first and foremost into consideration. It's not just Palestine, but it's the Palestinian resistance. It's the fact that the Palestinians, people, even under this colonization, are not passive and do not accept what is happening. They are demonstrating, they are fighting, and this is the expression of an incredible strength, power that opened our eyes. When we said during the solidarity campaign against the genocide, all open eyes are turned to Gaza, to Rafah. You remember, thanks to the Palestinians, we opened our eyes to turn our glance towards Palestine. That's the first thing, Palestine, at the heart of it all. The second thing, also very important, we saw in the last years, since October 7th, 2023, an incredible accumulation of strength, forces. So these strengths were not just the fruit of a spontaneous abstract activity. It was the work of each and every one of us that daily went down on the streets, distributing, handing out leaflets and small actions with it's never useless. And the proof is the general strike on the 22nd of September and October 3rd. 2 general strikes in 10 days, something we haven't seen in decades in Italy and in all of Europe even. Today, what they want to make us believe, that youth is passive, is not interested in anything. That's what television says. The domineering classes say about youth. What we have seen in Italy is exactly the opposite. Since the 7th of October of 2023, we see how active the youth has been. I don't like to say it's a generation, Gen Z. I prefer, in fact, to name it the Gaza generation, because it's thanks to Gaza that this generation has stood up. So a youth that is interested in the debates and looking into all the contradictions we are experiencing, the accumulation of strength we see in the last years. And what we see is a qualitative jump. This is also to take into consideration. How has this leap taken place? Thanks to the entry of the working class. Without the working class blocking and demonstrating, it is never able to produce what we have been able to produce. What have they done? In fact, it started with the Dockers. You know the story very well. We just mentioned it. They were able to do at least 2 things. The first thing was to connect an international question to a social question in Italy, because they said, yes, we are blocking the transportation of weapons, ammunition, explosives towards Israel. and before towards Saudi Arabia, because there were already people in 2021 who already led actions against Saudi Arabia, bombing Yemen. That is nothing new. It has already been organized in the past, but it already said no to the war, no to the genocide, but yes to our security at the working place. It's dangerous to work with explosives in our containers, and that concerned all of the working class in Italy and around the world. Everywhere, people became aware of what was happening in our country and in the world. So that was the first aspect. The second element, more recently, with the blockade, the general strike, all of a sudden the strike became a fighting tool within the hands of the working class. And this is something that had disappeared in the last 10 years. And this is thanks to the dockers, thanks to the working class. This tool has become thinkable, powerful again in the hands of the working class. It had an influence for youth. Youth took the floor after the call that you heard about. Ricardo said, we're going to block everything. We're going to have an international strike. The next day, young people in universities passed on the same call. And the day of the strike, they all took part. So it's a great influence. And there are contradictions, obviously. The first one at the heart of the unionist movement, and that is very important for the French unionists with which we debate greatly, we discuss. Everything that was built with the dockers started thanks to the important work done by the basic union, which wasn't a confederate one. They even tried, the CGL even tried to boycott the strike on September 22nd, calling for one on the 19th of September. It was a failure. They were forced, thanks to the strength of the movement for Palestine, to adhere to the date in October. This is something we must insist upon, strengthen, and at the same time put pressure on the confederal unions as well, so that they adopt the right position. A second contradiction that opens a breach within the government. For several weeks, Giorgia Meloni's government is not able not to speak about Palestine. It is forced to do so. It is forced to take the floor on Palestine, the ships, and on what is happening with the ministers that want to make the general strike illegal. And they said, okay, if you're going on strike on a Friday because you want a long weekend, no, workers refuse receiving their salary for a day to be on strike for Palestine, for working and living conditions. And this is something we must deepen and go further into. The government thought they could treat Palestine in an administrative way, as it did for all other issues. No, the Italian people reacted and deeply to the ethical issue. So it wasn't an economic or governmental question that mobilized thousands and thousands of people, but not moral questions, ethical questions. So I'm coming to my conclusion, because the second question that you are all asking, what should we do next? There were two general strikes. What can we do now? I believe that we, as a political organization, even the media, the mass media, had to recognize that the strikes organized and the massive mobilizations happened thanks to the basic union, the People's Union. It's all of the left center who was remained silent, facing this genocide in Gaza, now are saying that thanks to this union, we are talking about it.
So we asked to create 100 assemblies, a bigger organization, a more powerful organization. Concretely, very simple words, maybe I'm going to say things that are too simple. But we need to learn from Gramsci, who said we need to educate ourselves, agitate ourselves, organize our intelligence, our enthusiasm, our force. And this is what Potere al Popolo is going to do in the coming weeks. Thanks to the international solidarity, we will have the strength to do it. Thank you very much.
Le génocide du peuple palestinien.
The Palestinian people genocide could not take place without the support provided by the American administration. Joe Biden yesterday, Donald Trump today. We are now going to have the pleasure to welcome an American activist famous on the international level because she has been in contact with many international American managers, Congress members within the Capitol to ask for a ceasefire and the embargo on arms delivered to Israel so that they take responsibility for the slaughter of children in Gaza. Gobert Benjamin, co-founder of Code Peak.
It's such an honor to be here and to look out at you and know that we are one big family that loves humanity. I must say that coming from the United States, it's hard not to be so ashamed of our government that is not just complicit, but is a partner in genocide. And I'll also, as coming to you as a member of the Jewish community, who is so ashamed that not every single Jew in the United States is standing up against what Trump and the whole administration is doing. But I am delighted to represent the millions of Americans who are fighting back, the millions of Americans who are, as you say, militants here, the millions of young people who are saying absolutely no to this genocide. And you've seen the encampments in colleges after colleges all across the United States that ignited a youth movement in the United States that is not just against the genocide in Gaza, but is also now questioning the entire capitalist system. One of the things I have the pleasure of doing day after day is going to Congress, where we run after the Congress people, stick our telephones in their faces and say, why are you supporting genocide? And then put on the social media the stupid things they say, along with the amount of money they take from the pro-Israel lobby groups. We are not only shaming them, we are making them embarrassed to take this blood money. And we now have more and more members of Congress who are pledging not to take the pro-Israel lobby money and not to vote for more bombs to go to kill babies in Gaza. Unfortunately, they are still the minority. And we see that Trump is trying to hold together the Republicans in support of Israel, but he is losing his base because the base is saying, you're supposed to be America first, but instead you are Israel first. And they are questioning that policy. And so that's why he's being forced to pretend that he is a peacemaker, being forced to try to stop the genocide by his preposterous peace plan. And of course, he also says he wants to win the Nobel Peace Prize. I think we can all agree that instead of a Nobel Peace Prize, he should indeed be in The Hague alongside Netanyahu. I think we can also agree that neither Macron and his Saudi dictator buddies nor Trump and the war criminal Tony Blair should have anything to do with a post-genocidal Gaza. And instead, we stand with our brothers and sisters in Palestine who say the Palestinians are the only ones that can decide how their country will be run. I also want to bring up the issue of Ukraine, because we see in the United States that it is the Democrats particularly who want to keep sending weapons to Ukraine, and they know that this is a war that can't be won on the battlefield. They know that this will only lead to more deaths of poor Ukrainian and Russian soldiers, will only risk a wider war. And so we are organizing the United States to say no to more weapons to Ukraine. The only solution is intense negotiations, not Tomahawk missiles. But that also brings me to the issue of NATO, where we are told we need NATO to protect us. We need to put more of our money into NATO. And we say, no, it is a war machine that needs to be dismantled. We say the money they want us to spend on war, and in the United States it is an obscene $1 trillion, is money we need to spend to feed and clothe and house and take care of our children. We also see in the United States an intense campaign against China, an intense campaign to say we must build up this war machine to confront China. This is the way that our government covers up for its terrible economic policies and a way it justifies this $1 trillion budget. And so we say China is not our enemy. We say we need to cooperate with China to address issues like global poverty and the existential threat of the climate crisis. We also see our government going back to the old days of the Monroe Doctrine, where we can dominate Latin America with this new fake drug war where we're blowing up boats off of Venezuela as part of a campaign for regime change in Venezuela. We say, hands off Venezuela. We also say that another kind of war being waged are sanctions, especially against poor countries like Cuba. We say, hands off Cuba, lift the sanctions. And in the United States, we see an intense campaign against our immigrant community, where they are putting immigrant agents into our streets, into the workplaces, into people's homes, masked agents, to grab people up and put them into private, for-profit detention centers. We are organizing massively in the United States in community after community to drive these agents out of our neighborhoods and protect the immigrant community. I also don't know if you saw when Trump and the Secretary of, it's now called War, which is appropriate, not defense, the Secretary of War gathered 800 generals together to talk to them. And one of the main messages is that there is a war internally in the United States against us, what he calls the lunatic left, and that he wants to use the troops in our cities to fight against us. And so we say no to armed troops in our cities. We say no to having the National Guard patrolling and fighting its own people. We are not the enemy. The enemy is fascism. And so we are in the courts. We are in the streets. We are told to be silent, which makes us be louder and louder. And we are inspired to be here with you because we are inspired by the great protests that you have all over Europe, especially our friends in Italy. We are inspired by the 44 countries represented in the flotilla, the courageous people on the flotilla. We are inspired by the boycott campaigns, the divestment campaigns, the sanction campaigns. And we are inspired by the ideas coming out of this gathering to work together for international days of action and stronger, more effective campaigns to fight the genocide and to fight war in general. And I want to end with a chant that we say in the streets. We say, when Palestine is under attack, what do? Stand up, fight back. When our democracies are under attack, what do? Stand up, fight back. Free Palestine. Thank you.
Personne ne leur donne jamais la parole.
No one ever gives them a chance to speak, for good reason, because they are Ukrainian, they are Russian, and they are going to speak today together. They signed the Russian-Ukrainian appeal against the war, members of the network Peace from the Bottom, Andrei Konovalov and Lisa Smirnova.
Greetings to everyone who is present here. I want to say a big thank you for the inspiring words that were heard right now from the previous speakers. And I hope when I will explain the situation in Ukraine, we could see many parallels of the hypocritical and the double standard policies of the Western governments that are happening in both countries. I left Ukraine, and I was lucky to do so less than a year before Russian invasion, after I was lucky to be forced to flee because of the political persecution by my own state. It started after I tore down the flag of the organization called Ukrainian Insurgent Army. They are Nazi collaborators responsible for the death of more than 100 Polish and Jewish civilians during the Second World War, and whose flag today flies in the central square of my hometown. And after that, a criminal case was opened, threatening up to 4 years in prison. And when the far-right radicals began appearing outside of my relatives' home, looking for me, for the sake of my own and for the sake of my loved ones, I fled, using my master thesis as the way out. Orphaned at the age of 9 and raised by my early grandmother, today I am separated from my family, as many of the other Ukrainian families are. Non-willing to participate in the war, today I cannot return to my own country, and I can only wonder whether I will ever see my grandmother or my family members ever again. And yet, I still consider myself incredibly lucky. I could have, like many Ukrainian friends, spent months trapped in my own apartment, terrified of being forced to risk my life at the same time by taking the life of others. Or like another close friend of mine, I could have endured 2 desperate weeks on foot trying to cross the Ukrainian border through the remote Carpathian mountains, hiding from the drones, trying not to freeze, hiding from the dogs and from the soldiers of my own country, ordered to shoot to kill their own compatriots trying to flee the country. Or I could have been one of the more than 40 bodies pulled out of the single river on the Romanian border, the Tisa, which for many Ukrainians has become a deadly line separating them from the rights that should be granted to them. According to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, about 3/4 of all soldiers fighting on the front lines have been mobilized, not volunteered. And as the UN Commissioner for Human Rights reported the very same month, November 2024, as the report came out, torture, beatings, suffocations, and strangulations were used by draft officers as the part of the mobilization process. The methods of these mobilizations regularly produce surreal incidents. Almost every day, Ukrainian society, is shaken by the photos of mothers showing the battered bodies of their sons, previously abducted by the draft officers and later falsely declared dead from heart failure or a stroke. And their pleas of their parents for the justice obviously remain unanswered. And last year, when I asked a member of the Bundestag, German parliament, the member of the governing coalition and member of the Bundestag about this exact report documenting these tortures, she looked me straight in the eye in front of several witnesses and said, "We know and discuss everything that is happening in Ukraine, but we will never bring it out to the public." Very similar to Israel, while condemning Russia for its contempt of human rights, the governments accept and legitimize the systematic practice of torture in Ukraine. They speak of the need to continue the wars to defend freedom. But what does freedom have to do with the decision to forbid people from leaving the war zone and forcing them instead into the bloodbath? They speak of protecting our future, but what could be more dangerous for the future than normalizing the dehumanization of entire peoples and toying with, even mocking, the risk of nuclear war? They speak of defending democracy, but what could be a greater betrayal of democracy than abolishing the one defense ordinary people have against the arbitrariness of the state? Free democratic elections. And what could be a greater threat to democracy than disregarding such fundamental rights as the rights for security and the right to refuse to kill? But these politicians, they are right in one thing. The democracies are really in danger worldwide. But we must say clearly, the threat to our democracies does not come from a specific nationality, culture, or religion. The real danger lies in extreme social inequality, in profit-driven warmongering, and in the selective application of basic human rights. And the only way to resist this danger is to reject division, to stop branding entire nations as enemies, and to demand a return to realistic dialogue, to readiness for compromises, and to the counterparts' security concerns, to the solutions that can help us to stop the advance of the far-right forces in Russia, in Ukraine, but as well as in Israel, in the United States, and here in Europe. Democracy is really worldwide in danger, and only a global rejection of confrontational politics can deprive the radicals of the support, protect democracies, and make the world a place where justice is more than a promise. And that is why I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the organizers of the event and to everybody who came here, because the coming together of organizations and actors that take principled stance on human rights and on the interests of the broader society clearly sets us apart from the national egoists and offers the way out of today's security crisis. My organization, our organization, the Alliance of the Post-Soviet Left, in turn brings together conscious objectors, deserters, and political exiles from Russia and Ukraine who remain in close contact with underground and persecuted anti-war groups on both sides of the conflict. We collect and systemize evidence of the violations and repressions tearing our countries apart, and we are always ready and glad and thankful to support those who share our struggle. And talking about Ukraine, according to the Ukraine's prosecutor general, talking about the people who have fled the army and decided not to partake in the war, in just first 6 months of this year, Ukraine had seen 125,000 of new deserters and conscientious objectors. And I must emphasize very much, to stand with Ukraine means to stand with them, with its people, and not with those who ensure the safety of their own families while forcing the others to sacrifice their life and the lives of their children. Freedom indeed cannot be made out through coercion. And the very first step that the European governments could have taken would be to tie those billions poured into weapons to concrete measures taken by the Ukrainian authorities, measures aimed at reducing the scale of the lawlessness and the torture of their own citizens. But that, of course, is not what we see, not what we are meant to see, because these armed deliveries and this war itself have nothing to do with freedom. They have nothing to do with democracy, and they have nothing to do with the interests of the Ukrainian people or the Ukrainian state. They serve one thing only, the interests of the neoconservative transatlantic clique, my dear friends. And finally, when they claim that supporting this war, or any war by that matter, is about defending Europeans and their rights, I want to make this absolutely clear. Not one European could be truly confident in their rights until human rights and democratic rights apply to all. And no one can ever feel truly safe until the security is guaranteed for all. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And please welcome a dear friend of mine, a political exile from Russia, Lisa Smirnova. Thank you.
Bonjour, camarades.
Hello, everyone. Have you seen how Donald Trump has changed in the last weeks? He promised to sign an agreement in order to establish peace. And now he's calling Russia a paper tiger and is sending nuclear submarines near its coastlines. His war minister is telling the generals, we are getting ready to war and we are preparing to a victory. So the strategy of the agreement has failed. This means a cynical peace, an imperialistic peace between the great powers to the detriment of our peoples hasn't worked. Contradictions are too great, and here we are faced alone to this endless war. And people in Russia see this as well. For them, the war has already lasted for 43 months. 250 to 300,000 people have died, and hundreds of thousands have become disabled. The polls show that at least 3/3 of the Russian population want immediate negotiations and the end of the bloodshed. At the front, fatigue is even deeper. Soldiers are exhausted, as show their diaries, their letters, and their conversations that are heard. The number of deserters is growing, but why this fatigue isn't changing into a protest against the war? There are several answers to this question. The first is that the Russian authorities have perfected their neoliberal techniques. Now the poor are signing contracts with the army that cannot be terminated, and that is changing them practically into slaves for money. For the death of one soldier, the family receives more than a salary, an entire life salary of a worker. Poverty and inequalities have not just changed human life into a commodity, but it has changed life itself. The central element of the system is this repressive apparatus. Any dissidence leads to jail. Any attempt to oppose to the injustice on the front is punished by torture and often by death. But there is another reason. Only one political solution in order to put an end to this war. Many people have been lost. For example, I have a friend, a left-side activist. In 2022, he opposed to the war and took part in several demonstrations. In these demonstrations, which were repressed, he got discouraged and lost all hope. Neither the left parties, the liberal pacifist parties have been able to tell him how to put an end to the war. Most of them, on the opposite, were calling for an escalation, and he, as millions of Russians, decided that the most realistic path towards peace was a victory of Russia through weapons. He signed a contract and left for the front. 6 months later, he was killed. Of course, money is the foundation of the Putin's military machine. But without hope for peace, that is, of life, even money doesn't work. Finally, all hopes are turned towards Trump and his deal with Putin. Whatever it may, if we can just end this nightmare. Today, this hope has vanished. The main lesson in these 40 months of horror is that the actual regime is incompatible with peace. When my friends and I, thank you. When my friends and I took part in the demonstrations against war at the beginning of the conflict, we were numerous, especially in Moscow. But it was about mainly the educated middle class, and none of those who pay the high price of this war today. Most of the people looked at us with distrust. For them, we were the privileged elite. People feared that the politicians who were in favor of the Western world would get along with the Western world against the ordinary Russians, as in the 1990s. When the protest was repressed, almost 1 million of war opponents left the country. Moscow, the city which was the most opposed to the regime, has become the most faithful one and loyal. Today, the discontent is accumulated in the poor regions among the working class. But neither the liberal opposition, neither the Western politicians discuss with these people. On both sides, they want a war until the victory, that of Ukraine and the Western world. More shells and more missiles still. It's as if Putin proposed a victory and the Western world the defeat, as if there was no other option. I know that many of you have been called Putin's useful idiots when you oppose to the militarization of your countries. After all, the leading class in the Western part of the world behave as just like the Russian oligarchy. They're calling to tighten our belt, to defeat the exterior enemy. Yes, to defeat the external enemy. And those who disagree are called foreign agents. Just as in Russia, for Starmer, Macron, or Trump, the war is becoming a means to preserve power, often to the detriment of democracy. But Putin does not fear a military defeat. Even worse, he has at his disposal the atomic bomb. Each escalation only strengthens his power. This is why what we are doing today is even much more dangerous for his dictature than the bombs and missiles that Macron, Scholz, Merz, or Trump are sending to the front. We want to offer to our people what their leaders refusing, peace. It's the main question, not the victory, but precisely peace. The end of the bloodshed, the carnage. And this is what most of the Russians think, especially in the trenches. This world must not be directed by abstract conditions, neither by borders drawn by politicians and civil servants, neither by national or imperial fantasies. This must be a world founded on will, that of people themselves, on their self-determination. Self-determination does not simply consist in referendums to determine to what state a territory belongs to. Self-determination is the return to a collective destiny at the hands of the people themselves. But will Vladimir Putin accept such a peace? I doubt it. It will certainly seduce thousands and thousands of people in the trenches and millions at the back. And if Putin refuses it to them, he will have to wage war on two fronts. The program we are discussing about today brings together the fall of Putin's regime, more than all the missiles from NATO. But it is impossible to offer an anti-war platform that is democratic, loud and clear from the inside of Russia. The liberal opposition and Russian pro-Western world is incapable of it, and even less the Western elites. Only the left-wing forces and anti-imperialist forces can do it. This is the reason why I suggest creating a working group that will be in charge of establishing the platform. Until our next meeting, we can and we must turn our words into actions. For example, for us Russians, there is a specific date, January 19th, day of the anti-fascists that were killed, the commemoration against political repressions and victims. Today, the main victims of repressions are deserters. I'd like to say with pride that one of the Russian deserters has joined our Russian-Ukrainian coalition. And he is here with us today, Ilya Zaripov. The 19th of January, we could make of this day a day of solidarity with the deserters and war opponents, victims of repressions. Solidarity with them would be a concrete contribution to the beginning of a change in Russia. Only these changes will be bearers of a true peace. Thank you very much. He is part of a 90,000-member organization. The average age is 32 years old. They are fighters settled within the unionist movement, solid defenders of the Palestinian people and immigration, chased by the American administration. These activists at the heart of the American imperialism are part of an organization whose representative is Rashida Tlaib, Palestinian origins, an organization for the candidate of New York, is about to win on November 4th, attracting Donald Trump's hostility. He's a member of DSA, Socialist Democrats of America. He comes from New York, and now Andrew Vasta.
Hello, comrades. Thank you for coordinating this important meeting. A meeting of this size is truly a very impressive accomplishment, and I'm hopeful that the energy from this meeting will yield many, many more accomplishments. The Democratic Socialist of America is proud to attend and reaffirm our commitment to the global movement against war and genocide in Palestine. DSA is the largest socialist organization in the U.S. We are building a socialist party deeply rooted in the multiracial working class. As mentioned, we have elected officials across the country from the local to the national level who are fighting alongside DSA for policies that support our class at home and abroad. This includes Rashida Tlaib and Zoran Mamdani. Our members are spread across the labor movement, organizing their workplaces and reforming existing unions into democratic and militant bodies. Our hundreds of local chapters are running strategic campaigns, lobbying for progressive legislation, building tenants unions, organizing immigrant defense, running boycott and divestment campaigns, and much more. This is the most difficult but the most important work for DSA and any activist organization. On every single campaign, we speak to working people, and this both activates politically our class and it trains our cadres in how to build the organization of our class. All of this work is in service of uniting a fighting working class. After decades of neoliberalism and a century of working class defeat, the American working class is deeply fragmented. Through these campaigns, we build solidarity in and beyond people's homes, workplaces, neighborhoods, and countries so that we can enter history as protagonists and change the world. This requires a clear acknowledgement of the position of the US in the world. The US is an empire. It is the driver of destruction, death, and devastation across the world. And with the rise of Trumpism, we have seen much of the austerity and neoliberalism the US has imposed upon other countries returning home. Our administrative state has been weakened tremendously as Trump purges and dismantles whole agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. All sorts of social assistance have been gutted, from Medicare to food subsidies to education funding. Our government is currently entering a shutdown right now on the healthcare cuts specifically. Trump and the Republican Party are trying to maximize cuts to social programs, and Democrats, for the first time in a while, have refused to go along with it, at least for now. In the shutdown, our government will not be paying the wages of millions of federal workers. Alongside these austerity cuts, the repressive state has been expanded and consolidated under Donald Trump. Through decades of both the Democratic and the Republican Party expanding the budgets and powers of ICE, the Immigration Enforcement, and the Department of Homeland Security, we've now seen their full transformation into a vigilante force, recruiting militants of the Trumpist fascist movement into their ranks and arresting and deporting people with no warrants, reasons, or proof of identification, as Medea described. They don't even wear uniforms or drive marked cars. Last month, the US Supreme Court effectively legalized racial profiling in immigration raids, as long as it's combined with another suspicious factor, such as type of employment. This means if someone is, say, Mexican and a construction worker, they can be stopped with ICE for no reason. We've also seen the crackdown on progressive journalists and organizations willing to cover this fascist rise. This is the fascist movement finding its marching spirits. With the Democrats in action for many years, it often felt like we were kind of sleeping our way into fascism in the US. And that has started to change. The fascists are indeed marching. And the repression, of course, does not end at the US's borders. Trump acts with belligerents across the world, militarizing the Southern Caribbean against the Bolivarian Revolution, taking away the visas of political leaders he disagrees with. But here, with the expansion of the repressive state, we must talk about Zionism. The question of Palestine and Palestinian freedom has been the singular preeminent force defining our political conjuncture and the nature of the state in the last 2 years. I'd like to return briefly to 2020, when on the heels of the global COVID-19 pandemic, the police murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis ignited a mass rebellion against racism and police violence. Concepts like defunding the police popularly emerged, and we stretched the limits of what was possible in mainstream politics. Millions marched in the streets and deeply reflected upon, challenged the logic behind racism and capitalism. In that moment, the ruling class in the US was divided. Some were locked into the white supremacist anti-democratic right, but many with excitement began to adopt corporate woke policies, from universities to for-profit corporations. That was the easy and profitable move. JP Morgan could make money off of loans to low-income homeowners and call it a Black Lives Matter policy. Town governments could absorb the energy of activists through painting a mural downtown. This is not the case now in our struggles for peace and freedom across the world. The ruling class has unified in defense of US empire and Israeli colonization. Simultaneously, however, the working class has advanced and consolidated. We've seen through polling and through street protests that opposition to Israel's crimes against humanity is the majoritarian position, and that views on the issue increasingly fall along class lines, with workers supporting a comprehensive military embargo on Israel. It is this division that has fueled it's this division that has fueled the development of the repressive state. In 2020, the state responded to the public through both reform and violence. Since 2023, the state has been increasingly, if not completely, out of sync with the American public, leading to the sole course of action as crushing and quelling all forms of discontent. This gives us both reason for optimism and pessimism. The left seems more aligned with the American public than a decade ago. However, our access to power or the prospects of policy change, whether that be universal health care, trans rights, or a military embargo on Israel, seem more distant than it did 5 years ago. But I should end on the optimistic side, because outside the US state apparatus, we do see progress and we must claim our victories. This past week, we saw Microsoft announce that they no longer let Israel's cybersecurity unit, the genocidal Unit 8200, use a specific subset of their technology to surveil Palestinians in Gaza. This was after a new scandalous report that showed that Israel had used Microsoft's Azure platform to collect, store, and analyze the content of calls from the entire Palestinian population in Gaza. Microsoft remains deeply complicit in Israeli colonization through its many collaborations with the Israeli military and government. But it's a huge win, and it's the result of worker organizing, Microsoft worker organizing in the No Azure for Apartheid campaign. We have a very real duty to support these workers tangibly with strategic support and large-scale popular pressure matching the worker pressure to ensure this begins a domino effect towards cutting all of Microsoft and the whole technology sector's complicity in genocide. Also, with the leadership of the Palestinian youth movement in the US, we've made immense gains in mapping out the transport of weapons, identifying the points of leverage in the supply chain where we can organize workers in public and stop the transport of weapons to Israel. Finally, in New York City, we've nominated Zoran Mamdani as the Democratic nominee for New York City mayor, who it sounds like you all have heard of. Zoran comes out of the Palestine movement, and he comes out of DSA. As a DSA representative, he can only run with our full endorsement, and we won his full campaign. In our primary campaign for the June election, we trained 400 volunteer leads who are responsible for weekly shifts, training other canvassers to knock on doors. In this campaign, we knocked on 50,000 volunteers knocked on almost 2 million doors. As a Palestine activist, Zoran got his start fighting for divestment from Israeli apartheid in his student days at university, and introduced as state assemblyman legislation to revoke the charity status of settlements in the West Bank. These traditions have come together in the largest Muslim outreach in New York City history, canvassing hundreds of South Asian, Arab, African, and African American mosques, leading to the largest turnout of Muslims in any election in New York City history. As mayor, Zoran has pledged to bring New York City into compliance with international law in alignment with the BDS movement. This would be impossible without socialists taking the leadership and responsibility we need in this struggle. We pledge to continue this work until victory. Our work is most powerful when it's connected with you all at the international level. I think we saw this at the UN when the US and Israel were as isolated as ever on the global stage. Look forward to working with you. Free Palestine.
She's a British member of Parliament, opposing Keir Starmer and his policy to support the genocide for the Palestinian population. She left the Labour Party in 2025 and started a new party with Jeremy Corbyn to give more hope to the millions of British citizens who are looking for a radical movement to oppose the pro-war policy of the government and the far-right danger. And they demonstrated in the streets of London on September 13th in an unprecedented demonstration. Zara Sultana.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Zara Sultana et je suis députée britannique. Merci aux organisateurs et à vous tous d'être présents aujourd'hui. And that's enough of my French today. We gather today in Paris at a moment of both grave danger and profound possibility. Across Europe and beyond, governments are pouring billions, hundreds of billions of public money into weapons and war. That is your money, your labor, and your livelihoods. Yet these same governments tell us there is no money to fund hospitals, rebuild schools, house the homeless, or confront the climate crisis. We say, why is there always money for war, but never for the poor? In just 2 years, European military spending has surged to levels not seen since the Cold War. NATO members are racing past the 2% GDP target, and the European Union is establishing new defence funds and military programmes worth billions. And let's be honest, this wave of rearmament has nothing to do with making people more safe. It is about militarizing our countries and our societies. It is about enriching arms companies, and it is about preparing for wars that are unnecessary, unjustifiable, and entirely preventable. We must be clear, NATO is not about security and freedom. It is a war machine, and nowhere is the human cost of this war machine more visible or more horrifying than in Gaza. For nearly 2 years, Israel has committed genocide against the Palestinian people. No matter what our leaders tell us, it is genocide. Entire neighborhoods have been reduced to rubble. Hospitals and schools have been deliberately targeted. Journalists have been deliberately targeted. Children have been starved to death, and entire families have been wiped out in a single airstrike. Shame on every single government that has enabled this genocide, live streamed on our TVs and our phones. The International Court of Justice, the largest judicial body in the world, has issued binding provisional measures requiring Israel to prevent genocidal acts and to allow humanitarian aid. But those orders have been consistently defied. Starvation is being used as a weapon of war. Civilian infrastructure continues to be bombed. So international law has become completely meaningless in full view of the world. And what do our governments do? The British government has continued to arm Israel. Shame on them. Keir Starmer, a human rights lawyer, has continued selling components for lethal F-35 fighter jets that are carpet bombing Palestinian men, women, and children. Keir Starmer belongs in The Hague. Shame on you. For nearly 2 years, the British government has been an active partner in the genocide of the Palestinian people, dancing to the tune of Joe Biden and now Donald Trump at every turn. And across Europe, the picture is the same. Countries offering empty words, even tokenistic gestures towards Palestinian state recognition, while blocking meaningful action at the United Nations. The European Union is deepening military and economic cooperation through schemes like Horizon Europe and joint defence projects. These governments speak of peace in one breath while refuse to enforce the rulings of the ICJ in the next. This is not neutrality, this is complicity. And for generations to come, it will be a stain on Europe's conscience. And now we see Tony Blair return with the blood of over 1 million Iraqis on his hands, trying to be the colonial viceroy of Gaza. We will never accept it. He belongs in The Hague too. It is only the Palestinian people who will decide their future. No ifs, no buts. In Europe, we must fight for a Europe-wide, immediate, total arms embargo in Israel, not another bullet, not another bomb, not another penny of public money going to sustaining this genocide. But that alone is not enough. We demand real, enforceable sanctions, political, economic, diplomatic, until Israel ends its occupation, until it dismantles apartheid, until it complies with international law. Every form of official cooperation must stop. We must expel Israeli ambassadors from every capital city in Europe. We must shut down Israeli embassies. Diplomatic and economic ties have to be severed. Because like South Africa before it, Israel must be treated like the pariah state it is, and it must face the consequences of its crimes. To Keir Starmer, to Emmanuel Macron, to Ursula von der Leyen, we say shame on you. You are complicit in genocide, and one day the reckoning will come. One day, and all of us will make sure they will face justice at The Hague, and we will never forget their crimes. But ending complicity is only one part of the struggle. To prevent future wars, we must completely have a different vision of the future, not of barbarism, but of socialism. We are here to reject the endless logic of endless war, which drains our wealth, destroys our planet, and steals our future. We are here to say no more to the merchants of death, no more profiteering from blood and rubble. We are here to declare that every life is sacred. solidarity. We demand that our resources are used for the collective good, to protect life, to uphold justice, and ensure dignity for all. That is why today is a significant day for a European peace initiative, one that we have not seen in a generation. We carry forward the tradition that opposed the Iraq War, resisted NATO's nuclear escalation, and fought apartheid and colonialism. We stand in the footsteps of those who dare to imagine another Europe, one that was rooted in justice, solidarity, and peace. So from those who are on the flotilla, those heroes on the flotilla, for the inspirational dockers in Italy, from those who are resisting austerity and authoritarianism to those standing with the Palestinian people against genocide, from climate activists demanding an end to fossil-fueled militarism, to trade unionists fighting for jobs and wages instead of bombs and fighter jets, our struggles are deeply connected because the fight for peace is inseparable from the fight for justice. You cannot bomb your way to freedom, you cannot defend democracy while undermining it at home, and you cannot build a fair society while pouring public money into weapons of destruction. So our movement is not about nostalgia, it is about a new world. We are bringing a 21st century internationalism that sees war, racism, exploitation, and climate breakdown as interconnected crises born of the same unjust system of capitalism. We demand a world where our collective wealth created by workers funds homes, funds healthcare, not tanks, missiles, and genocide, where money builds schools, not bombs, where our vast resources secure total peace, not total war. That is the hopeful vision of the future that we are sharing today, and it must flourish across our borders. It must be the rebirth of a powerful, united, international movement for peace. Here and now, we build the power we need to win to defeat fascism in our countries. And when we meet in London in 2026, when we welcome you in London in 2026, we will be stronger, we will be broader, we will be more determined to win than ever. So let's say here in Paris that we will go to our workplaces and our communities with a shared determination, that we will build bridges, not borders. We will fund welfare, not warfare. We will invest in peace and not profit from conflict. And we will raise a movement powerful enough to tell every government in Europe, we will not pay for your wars. We will not arm your genocide in Israel. We will not allow this complicity to continue, not in our name. Together, we will bring the war machine to a halt. Together, we will build an unstoppable movement for peace. Together, we will fight for a Europe that serves the people, not profiteers. We will say yes to socialism and no to barbarism. The future is ours. We must seize it. And I will end with the words of Arundhati Roy, who says, "Another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can see her breathing. Merci, camarades, et solidarité." Free, free Palestine!
Il est député de la France Insoumise.
He's a member of parliament representing the La France Insoumise party. He's an activist in the Independent Workers' Party. He's a teacher, a trade unionist, and he's a member of the initiators of this meeting. He's been an advocate of international movements. He's participated in discussions with Italian, Great Britain, Germany, and United States activists to reinforce the connections between us. I give the floor to Jérôme Le Gavre.
Wow. Chers amis, chers camarades, salut.
Dear friends, dear comrades, hello. This is great.
Mes chers camarades, c'est une
Dear
grande
friends,
fierté, une très
I'm
grande
extremely
fierté pour moi
proud
de prendre la parole aux côtés
to be able to take the floor next to all those who participated in the meeting against the war that just took place and who are here today with us on stage.
L'actualité brûlante de cette conférence,
The recent news
contre la guerre n'est, je crois,
supporting this meeting against the war is something we no longer need to provide evidence for, because unfortunately all our governments, all our leaders are defending their own vested interests, and they need war to do that. Demonstrations, massive demonstrations we have been observing everywhere. When the Israeli state stopped the flotilla for Gaza, the general strike, the huge demonstrations in Italy are demonstrating this. Populations are not accepting what is happening. And the strength to stop the movement, stop the governments who are trying to drag us into war, are available. So it's our job, friends, comrades, to make sure that these forces are joined to be able to prevail. But it means, for me, that we have several tasks. And this is what I would like to focus on for the next few minutes. Dear friends, we know this. We're aware that with propaganda, governments are doing their best to pit the populations against each other, workers and populations against each other. And they're also doing their best to point their fingers at internal enemies. This is what Trump said when he addressed the dozens of generals who actually were quite scared. But in the same room, a minister a few months ago did not need Donald Trump to say exactly the same things. This minister, during a meeting to support the Israeli state and the Netanyahu government, delivered the closing remarks, "Let's get rid of the veil." The propaganda, the methodical war and division campaign, this is something that we want to fight by saying that the enemy is inside our country. Our enemy is our government.
Alors, camarades, les témoignages,
friends,
les interventions extrêmement fortes,
the testimonials, the speeches delivered by our Palestinian friends, Russian, Ukrainian friends who have just spoken, are very important. We need to find this propaganda, and we want to make sure that our friends are known. Unconditional support to the workers, to the young Russians and Ukrainians who say no to the war. We don't want to fight this war. We say we want to support the conscientious objectors, the deserters, and we will continue to say that neither Putin, nor Trump, nor Zelensky, nor Macron, nor NATO should prevail. Total support to the refuseniks who in Israel say we are not fighting this dirty war. We are not participating in the slaughtering of the Palestinian population. We need to make people aware of what the media are not saying. We have to show the example of these activists who in Palestine, regardless where they come from, are saying what I am saying today, because what they are pointing at is the only way out for all the people. So, dear friends, stop the governments who want to draw us into war. But it means that we need to support all the initiatives, and I'm referring to the flotilla for Gaza. You can be confident we are not letting the government go, because they are not moving, they are not doing anything. Worse, there are French citizens in jail in Israel because they tried to stop the barbaric blockade. Shame on this government who is not doing anything, although among the prisoners, 4 of my comrades are members of parliament: Rima Hassan, Emma Fourreau, Marie Mesmer, François Pigmal, and they are in jail. They are still in jail, and they are conducting a hunger strike. I would like to honor them, and shame to the government. Friends, comrades, we need to stop the process, the wheel from rolling. We need to be on the side of those who are fighting, the Italian dockers who show us the way. They blocked their country, they demonstrated against the Meloni government who is complicit with Netanyahu. Yes, comrades, the enemies are in our countries, they're in our governments. Le Cornu has just been appointed Prime Minister in France following Bayrou. Le Cornu, former Defense Ministry in France, a symbol. He covered with his lies arms deliveries to Israel for 22 million euros. It was last year, it was 2024. But he covered it up. And in late 2023, he was boasting war in Ukraine is an opportunity for the French arms industry. Weapon industry. He is the one who wants to vote a war budget against workers and against the youth of this country. So, dear comrades, we're going to do what it takes. We're going to use every resource we have. We're going to bring down the government if we have to, and we will try to do so as many times that we need to. Every single means and resource will be used, strike, blockade, so that what my friend Mathilde Panot was saying this week, she's the president of the La France Insoumise group in the French Parliament, and I quote, we're going to make sure that this government is the most ephemeral government in the Fifth French Republic, and we want to oust President Macron.
So, dear friends, fighting war is fighting against our government, and it's also fighting against its support. So against the National Rassemblement National, the French extreme right wing, and it's coming closer to it. It's more and more difficult to distinguish different parties. They mix. Fighting against the government means no concessions to all these more or less shameful support. I'm talking about the Socialist Party in France, but not only. All of these shameful support that play this game of negotiations with Le Cornu to negotiate what we haven't well understood. If it is just new renouncement, giving up, we are used to that. No concessions to all of those who the hand on their heart, talk about the left wing with cries. But we're the only ones to refuse that, and the facts give us reason. Who voted resolutions against escalation of war in Ukraine? The best tradition of the working movement is our flag, it's our pride, it's the workers' internationalism, our fight for the people to come together beyond borders. Marx said the working class has no patry. We need to fight against the governments who oppress people, have their own movement. This is the urgent task today, and we are counting with all of those who are available to do so and who are present today in the room, but I know there are many others. We are counting on you to take the place we deserve. Thank you. She comes from Chicago. When we met her for the first time, she expressed herself alongside doctors, surgeons in America who came back from Gaza, who were coming back from Gaza. She expressed solidarity of the movement for Black lives and Palestinian lives. She expressed that this war machine crushing the Palestinian people is the same that oppresses Black people in America. She talked about the Black Panthers Party. The floor is now to the co-director of the Movement for Black Lives, Amara Enia.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Hello, everyone.
Bonjour. To my comrade from the UK, that's probably the extent of my French as well. Good afternoon. It is so good to be here today. I want to start by thanking so many of my comrades. Peace to the comrades. Yeah? At a time when we need peace, I always say peace to the comrades. I also want to thank those who have shared some important messages today. I've heard so far from my family in the UK, welfare, not warfare. I think I heard, and my French-speaking family will have to help me, something about Macron démission. Macron démission. I really appreciate that one. We need to adopt that in the US. For our current president. Yes, yes. And then I believe it was my Spanish-speaking comrades who said, "El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. El pueblo unido jamás será vencido." These are the messages that we must take forward when we leave from this room today. I bring greetings coming here from the United States, from the greatest city in the United States, Chicago, from the West Side. By way of the original West Side, Nigeria. Yes, as an Igbo woman, I must bring those identities forward because they are critical to an analysis that we must have right now about where our world is heading and what is the mandate of this moment. And I contend that the mandate of this moment is about power. But it is not just about power for power's sake. It is not just about a power that seeks to dominate. It is a power that must be grounded in love. And I know that that doesn't sound perhaps intuitive, that it might seem contrary to come into a space where we are talking about being against the war, any war, and to lead with love, but that is what is required at this time. It is the only thing that will build the international mass movement that we know is necessary to protect our lives and to ensure our survival. We have a situation in the United States, and my comrades have already talked a little bit about what is happening there, where we annually send about $3 billion to Israel to fund their war. That is just the number that we know. That is not the accurate accounting of how much we spend on supporting war, genocide, and apartheid. We have a situation in the United States where they tell us that we cannot have access to health care. That is just the purview of the wealthy and the super rich. But we will turn around and spend billions of dollars funding war in Europe, in Ukraine and Russia. That is the messaging that we get in the United States, where we have homelessness on the rise. If you go to any American city right now, you cannot walk one block without a person who is unhoused, who has been failed by the state. That is the circumstance that we have in this same United States, which has determined that they want to actually spend even more money on war, even to change the Department of Defense to the Department of War, so that they can put more resources into fomenting destruction and death everywhere around the world. Our anti-war stance is not without context. Dr. King believed that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, one of our freedom fighters, believed that no one who has any concern for the integrity of life of America today can ignore the present war. He said this decades ago, and it is relevant today. He told America then, if we spend $35 billion a year to fight an ill-conceived war in Vietnam and $20 billion to put a man on the moon, we can spend billions of dollars to put God's children on their own 2 feet right now. He was talking about our priorities. Are our priorities death and destruction, or are they on our humanity? As a citizen of the world, he said, I speak as a citizen, as it stands, aghast at the path we have taken. I speak as an American to the leaders of my own nation. The great initiative in this war, these wars, are ours. The initiative to stop them must be ours. It is our responsibility for those of us who reside in the heart of empire to stop these wars. We cannot wait. We cannot wait for our so-called leadership to do it on our behalf. We have to make them do it. We cannot look to other countries to do it on our behalf. We must do it because we live in the heart of empire that has been responsible for the destruction and the exploitation and the colonization of the entire world. We have to lift our voices up at this time to end it once and for all. We must sound the alarm from inside empire. Black folks in the United States have been sounding the alarm for generations. For generations. This is a time where we actually have to realize that until all of us are free, none of us are free. This means that the plight of Black people in the United States is not just the problem of Black people in the United States. The plight of apartheid in Israel and Palestine is not just the problem of the Palestinian people. The plight of those who are living under debt slavery on the continent in countries that are exploited by the international financial architecture is not just the problem of those African people over there, or those people in Brazil, or those people in Argentina. It is all of our problems. The bigger truth is that apartheid anywhere is unacceptable. Genocide anywhere is unacceptable, whether in Namibia, or Rwanda, or Kosovo, or Gaza. It is unacceptable everywhere. What this means is that the only way forward for us all is radical solidarity. That from Nigeria to Brazil, Nicaragua to Botswana, France to Japan and Indonesia, our destinies are interconnected. We will not build the world we need to build. We will not build the worlds that we are required to build if we build it on this existing reality as a blueprint. What does that mean? It means that we must reject the status quo. We do not submit to a reality that puts profit over people. We do not submit to a reality that believes that well-being is only the purview of the uber rich. We do not submit, and we will not let the oligarchs, those who seek to rule by force, the fascists, those who seek to dehumanize others, we will not let them destroy this world, nor will we let them determine the character of the world that we are currently building. Therefore, my remarks today are calling us to a higher mandate, one that rises above race, rises above religion, rises above ethnicity, rises above nationality. I am calling us to a higher mandate that recognizes our shared humanity. And I want to invoke the spirits of our great revolutionaries because this is, in fact, a revolutionary time. These revolutionaries who witnessed the atrocities of the status quo and dared to believe that something could be different, dared to believe that even if I cannot see it with my eyes, that it is still possible, and they dared to actually work to create that new world. These revolutionaries, in my tradition, we recognize our ancestors who are still with us in this fight, helping us to continue on. I mentioned Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King earlier. Malcolm X, the great Pan-Africanist, who understood that it is not just about civil rights, it is about human rights, that we have to elevate beyond our nations to stand together globally. I invoke the name of Thomas Sankara, the great Pan-Africanist and feminist who understood what it means to actually work on behalf of the people and be amongst the people. I invoke the name of Steve Biko from South Africa. I invoke the name of Winnie Mandela, who gets a little less attention than her husband, but is just as responsible for the liberation of the people in South Africa. I invoke the name of Patrice Lumumba. And though there are many others, I will end with an invocation of our most recent ancestor in the United States who transitioned in Cuba, Assata Shakur, one of our great liberators. They are continuously with us in this fight, but we must believe that we are on the right side, and so we will prevail. It is not just about what we see with our eyes. What we have in our minds, our imagination, is actually a testament to what is possible. Because we are imagining a world without war, it means that it is actually possible. After all, the current world that we're living in came out of the imagination of some people. The current system of capitalism did not just spring up. It is not by default that that system exists. It was created and perpetuated. And what happened is a lot of folks just believe in it. We actually have that same power to create a world that is actually based on the rights and the dignity of all people. And as we imagine it, it means we actually have a duty to make it happen. We have a responsibility to set about creating that world. We are not just observers of the chaos that currently exists. We are actually tasked with restoring order and a new set of values as the basis for the world that we all deserve. That is our mandate at this time. We have to recognize that the power of the people is actually greater than the power of the state. Let me just say that again, because I think sometimes we might believe that those who sit in the White House or whatever house it is here in France or anywhere have this intractable power. We actually hold the power. There are more of us than there are of them, but we have to believe that. We have to believe that, and we have to act upon that belief. And so we are at a time where it is no longer a choice between violence and nonviolence. It is a choice between nonviolence or non-existence. We have a choice between war and our continued existence. And with that in mind, I want to come back to my earlier statements about the role that love must play in this work. Because power must be rooted in love for it to be legitimate. And love is actually a revolutionary thing. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. We cannot lead the people, we cannot be amongst the people if we don't love the people. And so we must keep that at the forefront. And so on this question of power, I'll close with this, because it was the Black Panther Party that had a slogan, the Black Panther Party, revolutionary party in the United States. They had a phrase that they would say, and they would raise their fist, the right fist, and I'm actually gonna ask for everyone in this room, those who are able to stand, and raise your right fist. And I'm going to start with an affirmation of free Palestine. And because we believe it and we envision it, it shall be so. And that power belongs to us to make it so. So I want you to say with me, all power to the people. 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 And let it be so.
Let's welcome the General Secretary from the British Union for a union with 200,000 members. She is fighting against the government of the Prime Minister, Claire Starmer, a support of Benjamin Netanyahu and promoter of war in Europe. The same government as many others that is cutting in public expense to favor military expense. We are numerous here at this meeting, unionists coming individually or to respond to the call of our organizations. Now, Fran Heathcote.
Friends, we meet at a dark time for our world and for all of humanity. This week in Manchester, a terrorist attack on a synagogue killed 2 innocent people. We express our solidarity and our condolences to the Jewish community in Manchester in the wake of that attack, and we have seen 2 disturbing trends emerge. First, an attempt to weaponise that awful atrocity to ban protests against the ongoing genocide in Gaza, a frankly dishonest conflation that protesting against Israel is the same as protesting against the Jewish people. Secondly, from some people saying that Jewish people are somehow complicit in the crimes of Israel, or that their suffering must not be acknowledged without mention of the genocide in Gaza. And I want to be absolutely clear. Jewish people in the UK or in France are not responsible for the actions of the government of Israel. Any more than Muslims in Europe should be held accountable for the actions of Saudi Arabia or Iran. We can and we should condemn the Israeli state. That is not anti-Semitic. And we must build solidarity between communities in our countries and never, ever allow division and hate to prosper. On behalf of my union, PCS, I've been proud to speak at dozens of protests called by the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign and by the Stop the War Coalition, some of which have mobilised hundreds of thousands of people onto the streets of London, young and old, black and white, Muslim and Jewish people, all united against genocide. Across the world, people have been protesting and taking action against the Israeli state and against their own governments who are so often complicit. We know that in France, in Germany and the United Kingdom, governments have clamped down on the right to protest because our humanity and our solidarity shames them. Our union has supported those that have been arrested, and we have led the move to oppose the prescription of Palestine Action, which is now the unanimous position of the British trade union movement. My government, though, the UK government, has been arming Israel even as the United Nations say that it is committing genocide. We have been selling components for the F-35 jets that are being used to slaughter Palestinians. This week, Channel 4 has exposed that the UK government exported over 110,000 bullets to Israel. Indeed. We know from medics and from the images live streamed on our phones that the Israeli Defense Force has been shooting unarmed men, women and children in Gaza. One international doctor who has treated Palestinians in Gaza has reported that the IDF is targeting specific body parts, including teenage boys being shot in the testicles. His testimony has been corroborated by many others. This is amidst the ongoing starvation, the denials of medical aid, the targeting of hospitals and of journalists. The ongoing genocide in Gaza is an absolute stain on humanity. Those responsible in the Israeli government and in our own governments must be held accountable. It is a failure of humanity, but we must never lose our humanity in response. We have to redouble our efforts to build a politics based on humanity, one based on compassion and one based on solidarity. And it is in that spirit of humanity that I want to finish by reading a poem which is called O Rascal Children of Gaza by Khaled Juma. O rascal children of Gaza, you who constantly disturb me with your screams under my window, you who filled every morning with rush and chaos, you who broke my vase and stole the lonely flower on my balcony, come back and scream as you want and break all the vases, steal all the flowers. Come back, just come back. Comrades, we have to keep campaigning until the genocide is halted and until the Palestinians are free. Solidarity and thank you.
Il est député de la France Insoumise du Val d'Oise.
He's a member of parliament for the La France Insoumise party, and in 2022 he presented a bill of law for the amnesty of the yellow vest protesters who had been condemned. He's a specialist in international law, co-author of the international program by the France Insoumise for the 2017 presidential elections and then the 2022 elections. He goes with Jean-Luc Mélenchon during his travels in international venues. I would like to give the floor to Arnaud Le Gall. What an honor. What an honor to be able to take the floor in front of maybe 4,000 people to defend peace, a central issue in this time. Friends, internationalism is alive and kicking. Every day we hear about international campaigns, but there is an international campaign for workers and for people. War, colonial war, genocide in Gaza, invasion war in Ukraine, 30 years war in Congo, where the resources are being plundered. War between two fractions of the army that are destroying the country in Sudan. It's a long list. We have 161 armed conflicts in the world, a record since World War II. The threat of a war between major powers with nuclear weapons is back on under the limelight. This goes along with the uninterrupted expenses for weapons in the last 10 years. How did we come to this? I'm sorry, I'm not going to bore you and depress you with this history, but in the dominating ideology, there is a very simple explanation. Authoritarian regimes such as Russian, Chinese, and a number of non-governmental players, non-Western players, are moved by the hate for our values and free world. From Ukraine to the Near East, the challenge here is to fight barbarians. Western leaders are allowing the first genocide in the 21st century to take place in Gaza, supposedly to defend democracy. But they despise the symbolic attempts to help the Gazan population. What they don't see is that even though the flotilla is not docking, the message is there. We are not complicit with the genocide. Right now, our thoughts go to the Gazan populations and the flotilla activists who have been jailed by Israel. Some of them are members of parliament for La France Insoumise. Shame to the French government doing nothing to obtain their release, when others already have tried their best to get them to be released. Shame on the people who are complicit with the genocide. How did this happen? Only a materialistic interpretation will allow us to free ourselves from identity interpretation, right or left. What we are going through is the end of neoliberal globalization, the end of free trade and dollar financing that allowed, ever since the dollar was no longer convertible in gold, to restart the hegemony of the American state. But this was made possible by an empire based on ideological and financial dominance in the 90s, and the Americans who claim to control the unipolar world brings the story to an end. And the idea according to which liberal democracy and the world economy is imposing itself on the other countries and bringing about peace. Now, this so-called happy globalization led to a social war. 1980, 2022, the share of salaries in added value has gone down in developed countries, and from 62 to 49 in developing countries. This is what we call class war. And national oligarchies have profited, and those holding the capital, who wanted to decrease production costs, led to workers being exploited in some places and other countries being deindustrialized, and this was sooner or later going to be made public. Globalization initially was an armed globalization. The American war was bloody for the Iraqi population initially, and ever since the Americans came to Europe at the end of the Second World War, we have understood that NATO enlargement was the priority. We now understand the consequences. And then the enemy continued with the war on terrorism following 9/11. Neoconservationists have led the United States to wage a continuous war, and this is disastrous for the rest of the world, including the United States, including also for those, except for those who had the shares in the weapons industry. And this led to a civilization shock that is being interpreted, and it has restarted across the world a racist colonialism movement. The interpreting will not allow us to understand why nowadays our leaders are saying nothing or even approving what is happening in Gaza. The identity movement and authority movement that we have just witnessed is coming from very far away. In 2008, for those who remember, the subprime crisis actually accelerated the destruction of the United States hegemony and the collective safety built around the UN, and it led to accelerating the war on nature, which leads to another number of wars because capitalism prevents us from fighting together the climate crisis. In the meantime, between the COVID pandemic and the war in Ukraine, both based on limitations to the Russian capitalism and the colonial war of Israel and Gaza, these movements have only been exacerbated. The war economy is shown as the only possible response to Russia invading Ukraine. But this war economy can be accounted for by the fact that after decades of industrialization, the weapons, the armament industry has become in France like one of the biggest industries, and it's the only industrial sector that can lead the economy. The war economy is therefore a new form of capitalism. I have no nostalgia from the former form of capitalism, but the next is even worse than the previous one because it's based on war. It rests on imperialist campaigns. We no longer pretend that we pay respect sovereignty. When Trump says Greenland belongs to me, I will help Ukraine if they give men their rare metals, and I will help anyone who continues to plunder the resources. This is purely imperialism at play. And the situation is even more dangerous if we consider that after losing their economic supremacy, the United States are now seeing their monetary domination being discussed by the BRICS. And they can only rest on their military supremacy. Finally, the identity and racist vision of the world has been released by the beginning of the Gazan genocide, fighting Islamic or leftist movements. And this is only based on the attempt to create internal enemies. Every day we have new internal enemies. This is what fascism is all about. Yes, peace, both civilian and international, is an emergency, and La France Insoumise has decided this would be the main axis of our fight. For years we have been carrying out inter-world diplomacy, and we rest our policy on a number of pillars. First of all, defending peace means that we must remind people that all lives have the same value. There are differences in political and religion regimes, but we have to have common rules because that's the base of our common humanity. And therefore, we defend the use of diplomacy and international law, although they have limitation. When leaders refuse to apply the rules, the problems are not the rules, the problems are the leaders. So how do we accept that we can give sanctions to Russia but not to Israel when Israel is perpetrating a genocide that we see live on our TVs? The whole world is seeing the moral failure of a Western set of countries with no more credibility. The only thing we can do is negotiate with those who are not our friends. I mean, that's the whole point, and that's at the bottom of diplomacy. The G7 group is totally up to their armpits in trouble. And when there is a genocide, the sanctions should have been applied immediately, universally. So shame on the French government who gave guarantees to Netanyahu. We are going to continue advocating for a diplomatic solution to the war in Ukraine because there is no military outcome possible or acceptable to this war. Likewise, we will continue to demand sanctions against Israel. We want to break the economic ties between the EU and Israel. And this is part of the motion that our comrades are going to defend in the European Parliament next week. And we want to bring the genocidal leaders in front of a court. We are refusing to go into a permanent military alliance, starting with NATO, because the alliance members cover 70% of the world military expenses. We refuse to follow the US in the logic they want to impose on us. If we come to the power, we will not pay the tribute asked by Trump, 5% of our GDP for military expenses on the European level. Yes, we refuse to be dragged into war logics that we don't belong to, neither the American nor ours, nor anyone else's. In the Asian Pacific area, we refuse to fight against China in a military alliance. And this means that the UN is the only legitimate player for our collective security. We must talk to everybody, not just the Western countries, and the only way to do it is within the UN. But when the leaders do not respect the UN rules, the issue is not the UN, the issue are the leaders. So we need to talk to everybody, and that has always been the case for the international family we belong to. But it's all the more an emergency now because the Western world is no longer the center of the world. And that's even better. Defending peace means that we have to fight capitalism on the national level, but also at the international level. I am referring to what we understood from autumn globalization. We know that nothing is possible if the people don't unite. I am thinking of the claims that are the starting point for demonstrations or citizen revolutions that have been in our history in the last 15 years. Tunisia, Thailand, Chile, Lebanon, Burkina Faso, France with the yellow vests, Wall Street, Madagascar, Nepal, Morocco. Everywhere the people are protesting and fighting. Of course, beyond the different situation, every national situation is different. We all reject the consequences of neoliberal globalization. We want good wealth to be shared. And everywhere there is a revolution, there is a counter-revolution, especially when nobody is there on the left wing to fight the popular protest. Everywhere the capital prefers a fascist response to popular and anti-capitalistic protests. But we want to continue claiming this. Peace means that we fight against injustice, the wealth of only a few people in our societies. We want to defend the rights of workers. This is not new. I mean, this was already the slogan of the International Workers' Organization that was founded after the Second World War, and in which we found a few remnants of the Grande Internationale. We are in an era when it is our duty to fight the fight without giving anything to the enemies of peace. Thank you.
He's one of the leaders and founder member of the coalition Stop the War in Great Britain. Born in the beginning of the year 2000 to oppose the war in Iraq, he is part of those who, with the campaign for nuclear disarmament and solidarity with Palestine, has been organizing for several months demonstrations of 100,000 people taking place in London to demand the ceasefire, stop the genocide, and an embargo on armament going to Israel. Fighting the British government relentlessly, convinced internationalist. He was one of those who had the idea of this meeting, and he's going to be the one to close it. Please welcome John Rees.
Thank you. And I bring to you the solidarity greetings of the Stop the War Coalition in Great Britain. Next Saturday, we will organise our 32nd national demonstration in solidarity with Palestine. We expect there to be hundreds of thousands of people on the streets of London next Saturday, as there have been in every previous demonstration. But I also promise you this: we are not satisfied with the numbers. We do not think that we have done as well as we could, because 71% of the population of Britain, millions of people, are in solidarity with the Palestinians, while only 12% of the population are in sympathy with the Israeli government. So although millions have marched, We believe that millions more are still to be involved and that they are as sympathetic to the Palestinians, as outraged by the genocide as those who have already taken to the streets. And so we are going back to the communities, back to the trade unions, back to the churches, back to the mosques, back to the synagogues, and saying, now is the time to march. If you haven't marched yet, come out onto the streets. And I want to speak a little bit about why so many people, so many working people in my country, so many working people the globe over are taking action in support of the Palestinians. It is not because they are Palestinians. They are not Palestinians. It is not because they are Jewish and because they want to demonstrate that they are not in favor of the Israeli state, although many of them do that as well. No, most of them have no connection with the Middle East. They are simply ordinary working people in my country. And the reason they demonstrate is because when they see a starving child, they sympathize with the child and not with the person starving them. When they see a boy standing against a tank, they sympathize with the boy and not with the tank. And when they see a boot on somebody's neck, they sympathize with the person on the floor and not the soldier wearing the boot. And they do so because they recognize in the fate of the Palestinians something of their own lives. They know that the governments that support Israel are the governments that hold them down. There was a British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, and not so long ago he said this. He said, "Let the bodies pile high." But he wasn't talking about Palestinians, although he might have been. He was talking about his own citizens during the COVID pandemic, when his government allowed 170,000 deaths in Britain because he couldn't take the action to stop the pandemic. And I'll tell you this, somebody who will do that to their own citizens will, of course, stand by and watch the genocide of the Palestinians. And that is why the enemies of the Palestinians are our enemies, and why, in the end of the day, we are all Palestinians. But we need to take stock of where we are, because this movement is enormous and it is still growing. How long is it? How long is it since any militant could stand on a platform like this and say we have seen 3, 4 general strikes in Europe in the past 2 weeks? How long is it since that was true? But with every great moment of a movement like this, there is also great danger, because we know from one end of Europe to the other, the alarm bell is ringing, because rearmament and war are the intention of our governments, and they are driven on by the fascist international headed by Donald Trump. We are in a moment of great opportunity, but also a moment of great danger. And to meet that danger, we have to deepen the movement And my Italian comrade is absolutely right to say that the crucial development is that the working class, the organized working class, is now entering the line of battle, and that is a decisive change. And so must internationalism be. With my comrades, with Jérôme and Stéphane, we planned this event months ago. And we planned it on a model. I was one of the people that organized the demonstrations against the Iraq war, including the demonstration of the 15th of February 2003, which is the largest demonstration in British political history and the largest combined global demonstration ever, which began when the sun rose on Australia, and in city after city and in every continent on the globe. It did not end until the sun went down on the west coast of America. We need that again. We need that moment again. And so no matter what the right wing say, no matter what the right-wing populists and the fascists say, no matter what they say, that we don't love our country or we are traitors to our country. These are people, by the way, who say they love their country, but they never ploughed a field or sowed a seed or harvested a crop or built a road. They aren't the bricklayers that made the buildings. They aren't the stonemasons that built the cathedrals. That was working people. That was working class people that did all that. So I say, I only have one country. My country is the working class, no matter where it is. And my mission is internationalism. Because when they say chauvinism, I say internationalism. When they say patriotism, I say internationalism. And I'm not a religious person, although I think it's the duty of every socialist to defend the right of religious people to worship in freedom how they want to, without state repression, without being blamed for the ills of the world. But if I were a religious person, there is somewhere that I would regard as holy ground. I would regard the Communard Wall in Père Lachaise Cemetery as holy ground, because that is where the dream of the first Workers' Republic the first society where people came before profit, where politicians were the servants of their people, not their bosses. That is holy ground. That is still the prospect before us. That is still the aim of this movement. So I commend to you some simple lessons. Deepen the movement. Specifically, deepen it towards the organized working class. And hurry, because time is short. I invite you back to the second Congress of this organization in London next year. We have already booked the hall. And I'll tell you where it is. Central Hall, Westminster, is right in the heart of Westminster, and when you walk out the front door, you will see Big Ben and the Palace of Westminster right in front of you. And I want to see Scandinavian socialists, French trade unionists, Italian dockers on the green in front of the Nelson Mandela statue, right in front of Keir Starmer's home. And I want to take the message that austerity and war are not the policy of the working class. So come to London. Come to London next June, and I guarantee that we will match the warm welcome that we have received these days in Paris. So I do believe we are on the crest of a working class renewal. And on the crest of every wave, you can look forward and see a future that you could only have imagined before. But you can also look back and see the crests of previous waves of working class insurgency. And I want to leave you with a thought from the last great revolt of 1968. A friend of mine, Tariq Ali, who led the Vietnam War campaign in Britain, in that year, he founded a new left paper. And on its front page, it carried this message: London, Paris, Rome, Berlin, we will fight and we will win. Thank you very much.
Nous arrivons à la fin de ce meeting.
We're coming to the end of this meeting, and for France, it's possibly one of the greatest international events in the last years. I'd like to thank all of those who made this meeting possible. Thanks to people, video, sound engineers, technicians, pro son, translation, interpretation, interface for interpretation, system risk for transcription, all of the Dôme de Paris, Palais des Sports team, and all of the activists who ensured the smooth development of this meeting, the media who promoted it. I apologize, I cannot quote everyone, but they know who they are. This meeting is neither a starting point, neither an arriving point. It is part of a chain of events. Deputy, doctors, youth, artists, unionists, all stakeholders in this resistance movements for massive rupture. We will contribute to organize and continue organizing in France and abroad the strength of our number, our people, against governments who wage war and the system that plunges the world into a barbarian world. We want to stop the genocide of the Palestinian people, stop imposing the embargo on. We want an embargo on weapons. We want to free Palestine.
Free Palestine! Free Palestine! Free Palestine! À bientôt!
See you soon.